What a gorgeous sunrise! I'll follow you to the ends of the earth. I mean it from the bottom of my heart. We all know that love does not emanate from a fist-sized muscle that circulates blood throughout the human body. We all know that the sun does not orbit the earth, and we all know that there are no ends on a spherical object. So how did these sayings originate? Did the figures of speech we use today begin life as the literal beliefs of our ancient ancestors? Today, we know these types of sayings are not literally true, but did the authors of the Bible know this? For example, when the Bible states that God searches the hearts of men, can we be sure that the authors actually understood that the heart muscle did not process nor generate the thoughts of human beings? Can we be so sure that the ancient writers understood that the muscle that pumps blood is not the origin of human emotions? Is it possible that they understandably mistook the effect for the cause and truly believed that the heart was the center of cognition and emotion? We're so accustomed to hearing the word heart as a symbol for love, emotion, thoughts, our innermost being, and so on, that we might have trouble envisioning how the ancient people really viewed this internal organ when we read phrases such as, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart," and "For with the heart one believes unto righteousness." The fact is, the ancient people of Mesopotamia, as well as many other regions of the world, really did believe that the heart was the storehouse of emotions, thoughts, feelings, love, hate, cognition, intentions, sensations. They viewed the heart, and to a lesser degree, the kidneys, in much the same way we now view the brain. The reasons why they mistakenly believed that the heart and kidneys were controlling their emotions and thoughts are easy to understand. One reason is philosophical. Could I get a little more realistic diagram, please? Whoa, that's a little too realistic. Okay, that's better. The human heart is physically, more or less, at the center of the body. The core essence of man would naturally be located roughly in the center of his torso, right? It only makes sense. Another reason is a misunderstood cause-effect relationship. The heart reacts to the hormones secreted by the adrenal glands, which, interestingly, are situated on top of the kidneys. So when a thought enters our consciousness, it can, for example, trigger the physical sensations associated with strong emotions, such as the dreaded butterflies in the stomach feeling when we are apprehensive about some upcoming event, or the roller coaster ride feeling that your heart is about to beat out of your chest when we go into panic mode. An oversimplified explanation is that our thoughts come first, which then trigger a process, which in turn signals the adrenal glands to secrete hormones, which in turn increases the heart rate. We can certainly forgive those ancient cultures for believing that the physical sensations in the heart and adrenal glands that were triggered by thoughts generated in the brain were actually originating from the heart and kidneys. The understanding that the adrenal glands were not actually part of the kidneys would take another few millennia to discover. The brain itself gave no indication it was even present. It didn't lurch inside the skull when anger reared its head. It didn't flap and flutter when intense fear manifested. It just sat there, silently, inside the skull, like a hard drive and CPU inside a computer case, silently processing the information and sending signals to the peripherals. So can we pinpoint just when the brain became known as the control center of the human body? In short, no. It was a very long and gradual enlightenment that spanned roughly 2,000 years. The very first speculation that we know of that the heart was not the origin of cognition came during the 5th century BCE from a Greek named Alcmaeon who lived in Croton. He was the first to speculate that the brain was the center of sensations and cognition. He is also one of the first we know of who dissected animals in order to study anatomy. He speculated that the eyes fed light into the brain, and this, I would imagine, is almost certainly one of the reasons he changed his views that the heart processed sensations, emotion, and cognition. In other words, the eyes, ears, nose, and mouth were all closer to the brain than the heart. Reminds me of an old Rush song. Closer to the brain, yeah, closer to the brain. Oh, wait, never mind. But Alcmaeon also claimed the eyes themselves contained light, and this theory was believed for over 2,000 years by many neuroscientists until as late, believe it or not, as the 18th century. But while Alcmaeon was slicing up Rover, another Greek, Empedocles, believed that blood was the source of one's intellect and that one's intelligence depended on the composition of their blood. He believed that the heart was the central organ of intellect and mental disorder. Over 100 years later, Plato would follow Alcmaeon's lead and claim that the brain is the seat of mental processes. Shortly after Plato repeats Alcmaeon's original speculation, a few other Greeks latch on to this idea. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, wrote a work that concerned epilepsy called On the Sacred Disease, in which he mentions that the brain is the source of our senses and cognition. I therefore assert that the brain is the interpreter of comprehension. Accident and convention have falsely ascribed that function to the diaphragm, which does not and could not possess it. I know of no way in which the diaphragm can think and be conscious. It ought to be generally known that the source of our pleasure, merriment, laughter, and amusement, as of our grief, pain, anxiety, and tears, is none other than the brain. It is specially the organ which enables us to think, see, and hear, and to distinguish the ugly and the beautiful, the bad and the good, pleasant and unpleasant. These early Greek speculations were not the norm. They were in direct opposition to the consensus views and would not have enough evidence to persuade the world to abandon the heart and kidneys as the CPU of mankind for another 2,000 years. And even though Hippocrates was on the right track concerning cognition, he also believed that epilepsy attacked only people with an excessive amount of phlegm in their sinus cavities. Here's another interesting claim by Hippocrates. For when the man draws the breath into himself, it passes first to the brain, and thus the air is distributed to the rest of the body. Hippocrates believed that the air we breathe in through our noses went directly to the brain, and this was the father of medicine, folks. His hunch about cognition was right, but he had absolutely no way to know it or prove it. Shortly thereafter, another Greek chap named Aristotle wrote about sleep and stated that he believed the heart is the seat of mental processes and that the brain is merely a radiator to cool it down. Aristotle was in great company with the long-standing and popular heart is the seat of cognition and senses theory, probably 99.99999, you get the idea, % of the world at the time. A few years later, another Greek, since the rest of the world was busy killing each other off, Herophilus, the father of anatomy, wrote that he believed the ventricles of the brain were the seat of human intelligence. Pliny the Elder lived during the 1st century contemporaneous to the latter part of the alleged lifetime of Jesus and well beyond. He saw the end of the Jewish-Roman War, and he died in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. He believed the heart was the seat of the mind, and that the brain somehow governed the heart. The heart provides the main housing for the vital principle and the blood in a winding recess. This is the seat of the mind. The brain is the seat of the mind's government. He also writes about the Egyptians and their understanding of the heart. The Egyptians, whose custom it is to embalm bodies, believe that the human heart increases in size every year and that by the age of 50 reaches its maximum weight of about 1/4 of an ounce. A rather silly claim Pliny makes just a few paragraphs later should help us realize just how little people really knew about anatomy and animals just 2,000 years ago. Lion's breath contains a virulent poison, and bear's breath is unwholesome. No wild animal will touch things that have come into contact with a bear's breath. We can see just how little even well-to-do educated people actually knew even in the 1st century. Here's the main point. If the Greeks didn't know, no one else knew either, especially a tiny tribe of brutal ex-Canaanites living in the shadow of the other comparatively highly advanced civilizations of that time and place. Once the Catholic Church came into full blossom, from around 1100 CE to roughly 1500 CE, medical progress faltered as human dissection was banned by the Church. You can probably guess why. We shouldn't tamper with the fearfully and wonderfully made temples of Christ. Although a few Greeks had made the speculation that the brain was involved in the senses and cognition of mankind, this belief would not become common knowledge anywhere in the world until long after the writings we now call the Bible were written. Greeks may have speculated about the brain centuries before the New Testament was written, but these were almost purely philosophically based speculations with no good evidence to back them up, and certainly no way to prove that the heart was not where thoughts emanated from. Debate over these speculations continued and would last well into the 2nd millennium. And speaking of Egypt,